Hi, Matthew.
Hi,
Uh,
Nathaniel.
it's good morning here, and I guess it's good afternoon in your area of the world.
Yeah, good evening. Even it's 5 p.m. Getting into the end of the day. In the US, it's often the end of the day because we tend to have dinner relatively early here. But yeah, it's amazing that we can talk to each other so far, and it's completely not even the same day, right? So
Exactly, yes. And I have the privilege of interviewing you, and you will be my very first interview for my podcast, and also my very first interview
oh no,
where I'm showing someone that I talk to on screen on YouTube. All right. So thank you for this honor and privilege, Matthew.
I'm very honored. Thank you for your invitation.
Yes. And for those who don't know, I took a module with Matthew just recently this year. I mean, last year, sorry, in 2021. And it was all about relational frame theory. All right. So let me just give you my audience an idea of what Matthieu Villatte, did I pronounce it correctly?
Hmm. Very
He's
well.
Dr. Matthieu Villatte. He's a PhD, assistant professor at Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. He obtained his doctoral degree in psychology in France, where he was trained in clinical psychology. And he moved to the US in 2010 to complete a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Reno, Nevada, Reno, under the mentorship of none other than the instigator, that's what he wants to call himself, of ACT
Already.
or RFT. All right. And Matthew Villatte is also the author of numerous books and chapters on mindfulness, acceptance, experiential therapies, and contextual behavioral science, just such as the first manual published in French on acceptance and commitment therapy. Wow, that's historic. Okay. So, and also the book, and it's available if you're in the Philippines and you have a hard time getting a hold of his book. It's Mastering the Clinical Conversation, Language as Intervention, co-authored by Jennifer Villatte and Stephen Hayes. All right. So it's available on Amazon on ebook, and I think some publishers, I mean, the publisher of the book also has it in ebook format. Okay.
Yes.
So he has facilitated over 100 clinical trainings in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and Europe. And over the past few years, he has run dozens of online trainings, gathering participants from all continents. So, welcome to the Philippines. This is your first time being interviewed by a
Yeah.
Filipino.
Absolutely, yes, yes, and I uh, I would love to come visit one day. I don't know where I would start because it's a fascinating country. You have it's hard to really picture it because so many islands. So it's a lot of countries. We can have an idea of what it looks like, the shape, but Filipino is like really complex. It seems fascinating. So I don't know if I will have an opportunity one day, but I would I would really love it.
Wow, we'd be honored to have you here. We might even have the opportunity to have you do a few workshops here. That'll be great.
Maybe, yeah.
And I'm sure you'll enjoy the beaches here. We have
Oh
some of
yeah,
the best.
yeah. You know, I have not left Seattle in 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic, and
Ah,
I have two very young children, so I've been really home and not even in France where I come from in 2 years. So I don't know
mhm.
where I will go the first time I leave, but if you want to invite me to the beaches of Filipino, I would be more than happy.
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah. We're top 10, top 5, whatever we have some beautiful islands here. All right.
Wow. Mm.
Okay. So let's go to the business at hand, Matthew.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'd really love to know more about you, a little bit of your history with RFT Act, and how did you end up in Bastyr, and even why you ended up in psychology. Why psychology, and finally landing on CBS, or contextual behavioral science. And maybe you could also explain some of these terms that I'm using.
Sure.
But let's
Yeah.
go first with your history. I think that's my
Yeah.
next question. Mhm.
You know, you'll see probably during our conversation that in a way my answer is the same for all the the questions, because for me there's a sense that really everything connects, everything's connected. And the reason why I got into psychology, the reason what is RFT, why I came to Bastyr, I feel like, oh, but it's the same answer. It's the same answer. It's the same answer. So I want to say that because maybe you can pay attention to that as we have a conversation, because it's not going to be literally the same answer, but there is a lot of connections for sure. If you look at from a certain perspective, like for example, why did I choose psychology?
Yeah.
It's so first you choose this path after high school, so it's
Yeah.
at around 18, and it's really the time when France you choose. It's a pretty strong choice. It's not like in the US, for example, where you go to college for a few years and
Uh-huh.
you make some choices in terms of major, but it's still
Uh-huh.
pretty general
Uh-huh.
before you make a more clear choice of what you're going to do, like med
Mm.
school
Mm.
or psychology. In France, you decide earlier. And so that means that right away at 18, basically, I decided I'm going
Mm.
to have a career in psychology.
Mm.
And it's kind of weird because it's not a topic that is studied in high school.
Mhm.
So, not like math, for example, or geography or things. If you decide to study that, you're like, I know what it is
Mm.
because I've studied before. But psychology, it's weird because
Mhm.
it's not literally studied. It's not a topic.
Uh.
To some extent, we study philosophy in France in high school, actually. So we
Mhm.
can touch on it, but I didn't that much. But of course, psychology it's everybody does psychology without
Yes,
realizing.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
like
Mm.
you can't not you cannot live with other people and with yourself without doing some psychology. It's
Yeah.
you look at how people behave. You have a hypothesis why people do what they do. You do the
Mm.
same with yourself. You reflect on
Mm.
yourself, on your feelings, your motivation, and you're doing what you're doing, how you're feeling, things like that. So in a
Mm.
way, we're all very familiar with this topic, but
Mm.
studying it and learning theories
Mm.
and then going for a career, it's particular when you've never
Mm.
really done it. And for me, it was first, it was an interest, just like curiosity.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
I think I was always probably fascinated by human behavior, probably
Mhm.
even as a child. Some children are more like on the observer side. They seem to get things and to be very interested in social interactions, things like that. And I think that was probably the case for me. I think it tends to be like that in my family. And it's not a surprise, I think, that I chose psychology, because I'm interested in people. I'm interested in understanding why people behave the way they behave, but I
Mhm.
didn't have a motivation specific in terms of what I wanted to do with it. And you see, that's an example when I was saying that my answer is going to be the same again and again, is that I was motivated by an intrinsic interest without having a very specific goal in mind. It was really
Mm.
I want to do something that I like, that I'm drawn to it, and
Mm.
we will see where it takes me.
Mm.
It's in, maybe I was in a fairly comfortable position that I could do it, that I didn't
Mm.
have to get a job right away. But I didn't come from a very wealthy family either. It's a very, very
Mm.
average family. And, I was just my mom, because my dad died when I was 13. So
Mm.
it's not like I could do whatever I wanted either, but I grew up in a familial culture
Mm.
in which the doing things that we're interested in is really important, like choosing a career because you're passionate about it. It's
Mm.
you could almost say there was a bit of pressure in a way to think this way, but that's what
Oh.
my parents did. And so I went to psychology because I was really curious about it, and I wanted to learn more about psychology. And then I just kept in a way, I kept going like that, choosing my
Mm,
path in psychology based on
mhm,
what I thought was the most interesting,
mm,
not based on what I was the best at, because actually I could have taken certain paths sometimes where I felt
mm,
like I had better grades,
mm,
but it's not what I was most interested in. So
uh-huh,
I progressively I I moved forward and did the
mhm,
a master and a PhD, and at every step it was okay. I'll do the next thing because it's interesting, and at some point I realized, that kind of mentality, it's in way of relating to work. It's actually perfect for academia, because in a way that's what you will do your life. You will remain a student, you will keep studying, exploring, and then you also get to share that with other people.
mm,
And my family, almost everybody is a teacher for a couple of generations, so I think I also
mm,
have that transmission. So it's like I receive, I'm curious about things, and then I'm like, oh, I
mm.
know all this stuff, and I want to pass it to the next generation or to peers. And it's I could have done something else in psychology, but I think probably it would have looked similar. Probably it would have been made of curiosity and
Mm.
exploration and understanding, and probably also a lot of transmission to other people in some ways.
All right, thank you. Wow, that's a very interesting story. And it's kind of a big contrast to our culture, because in our
Mm.
culture, you usually take what's more practical,
Yeah. Mm.
what makes more economic sense. You're
I think it's
saying
very
that,
typical of a lot of cultures. It's not.
uh,
I don't think it was. Mine was typical of France. Certainly not. I would say of the U.S. I
mhm,
don't think that much. Maybe a little more to France. That's a little more
yeah,
perhaps aesthetic, and there's this whole existentialism in the
oh
philosophy
yeah, yeah,
culture, and it's also the way that, of course, the country is organized. There's a certain, like education is almost free, even at the university in France.
oh
And there's
yeah,
a lot of social security, the like
yes,
the healthcare system, education. It's not like it's completely free, but you I think the system is made so that you can maybe take more time to explore a little more than in other countries. But that being said, I think it's also quite specific to my family, my parents in particular, who
mm.
they were artists. I say they were teachers, but they were musicians, first artists,
Oh,
and
oh,
they chose this path because they were passionate about it. I don't think you can be an artist without
yeah,
passion. I think
exactly.
it's impossible. You can make money, but that's not guaranteed for sure. And they didn't particularly make money. Uh, they were classical musicians and passionate about their work, and that was the model I had. It's like work is something you're passionate about, and that is integrated with your life too.
Yes,
It's not something that
yes.
takes you away from your family, your friends.
Uh,
Yeah, people who are passionate about work, and that takes them away from their family. But my parents,
uh,
they lived really that passion at home. Listen to music, they would practice their instruments, have students at home.
yeah.
So that's the model I had, and it has influenced me in the way I then developed my own work in psychology, which we will talk about after.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I have more to say, but I don't think it'll take us 2 days of talking if we did
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
You have
yeah,
to be here. We could talk by the beach.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
That sounds good.
so yeah, that brings me to the second part of the question, and also my second question.
Mm.
Y- you know, there are a lot of, let's say, approaches in psychology.
Mhm.
So what made you go into RFT? I'm
Mhm.
supposing you're also into acceptance and commitment therapy. Am
Sure.
I
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
CBS. All right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what makes it different from the other? I'm sure with the PhD, you've gone through all these other approaches in therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how did you
Yes.
see it as a fit to you and your work?
Mm.
Mhm.
My path first, while in France, I did my whole PhD in France. So really, my whole education in France before moving to the US.
Uh,
And the first big choice of orientation I made was toward behavioral psychology, behaviorism. And it started because, well, I want to keep the story relatively short here, but again, it's as I said earlier, it was interest, but what drew my interest? In France, the dominant model is psychoanalysis,
Uh-huh.
Freud, Lacan, and all their students. It's a real dominant model, especially 20 years ago when I started. It was even more the case. So
Mm-hmm.
behavioral psychology was really a very, very small part of what was studied, and I was lucky to be in one of the or three universities in France, I think, uh, that had teachers, professors who were really expert in behavioral psychology. So it was a coincidence, in part. I happened to my first actually class in my very first year was with the teacher who became my PhD supervisor, Steve Fresha, and he was a behaviorist, and he was very activist in a way, because he like I say, it was a minority of in terms of theory, and so he had a lot of motivation to grow this approach and to convince his students of the benefit of this approach, which was very different from psychoanalysis because it was scientific, and it was based on experimental research. So it was really the whole scientific way of thinking, measuring things, testing,
Yeah, yeah,
publishing.
yes.
Whereas psychoanalysis was or is still much more based on
Mm.
I'm trying to differentiate how I was thinking about it and now, because things have evolved, but it's not as quantified. It's not definitely not experimental. It's not things that you test in labs and things like that. It's more theoretical, conceptual, intuitive, perhaps also we could say. And so I think I was drawn to behavioral psychology because it felt more functional, more I said earlier that I was drawn to what was interesting, and I think it's interesting to me when I see the application. I understand how it works, even if I was not necessarily concerned about using it. Like I said, I was not at first motivated by a specific career. Like it's not like I wanted to be a therapist necessarily. I was curious. I wanted to understand, but understanding if it was not practical
Yeah.
did not work for me. I think it's because then it feels disconnected, perhaps, And so behavioral psychology, there was this, oh wow, I understand how that works, and I mean, it's true of psychoanalysis. If that's your theory, you can start to understanding things, but there is a natural application of behavioral psychology. It's like, oh, one of the basic principles is how our behaviors are reinforced by the consequences. So now if you say, oh yeah, okay, I understand that you understand me, so I can keep talking. But if you started looking away, or
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
like, okay, I would detect something. It's the consequence of my behavior would be different, right? So
yeah.
it's very basic, it's very intuitive, but then the theory gets very complex and rich, and so it starts from this basic idea, but then you can understand things that are very, very complex, and it's very quickly fascinating. So the what drew me to this approach is that I felt like, okay, it's based on science, and I had a pretty rational mind. I like to understand how things work, and even if my parents were artists and I love art, I think at that time I came, I still had a mind that was more. I want to understand. I don't want to. I was very sensitive to incoherence. If people give an explanation for something, I was like, that doesn't make sense. I would keep following up and say, no, that's not right. Well, you said this and you said that, and as even as a kid, very, very sharp with that. And I think the scientific approach to psychology perhaps was more suited for me at that time. So now I jump in time after my PhD. Well, during my PhD, that's when I discovered RFT Act. So I'm going to say just a few words to introduce also the approach, perhaps to people who are listening.
Yes, yes, please. Yes.
So RFT stands for Relational Frame Theory, and
Yes.
you can consider that it's a branch of behavioral psychology that is interested in language. So what we're doing right now, right? Speaking, talking, writing, all this reading, all this communication interactions that we can do with the symbols, like even gestures, it's language. Thinking is language in the sense of making symbolic connections among things. It's what we learn when we're as kids. At first we are born, we cannot speak, we just make noises, we cry, and then we live in an environment where people talk. They use a name, they point things, they correct us. We start understanding that papa, mama, dog maybe, and then it keeps growing and being more complex. Like I was saying about learning with consequences. At first, it's very basic, that papa, papa, and then it's sentences, and then more and more complex, and then you can do it without saying anything, but you're thinking, and it's rich and rich and rich, and then you can be abstract, and you can explore meaning of life and spirituality and political ideas and reflection and the whole life. So RFT is one theory about this behavior that try to understand how this particular behavior that we do, because we consider it a behavior, it's something that we do, language, like talking, speaking, thinking, elaborating, fantasizing, all this. It's something I do. Even if I don't see it, I can guess that you're thinking. I see you nod, and guessing you're thinking. It's an activity. And this support states that this particular activity language is an ability to make connections, basically, relating things together. And it's not unique to relational frame theory. In a way, all theories of language would probably agree with that. It's like, it says, okay, cup of coffee. Okay, so there's a sound, coffee, and then there's actual beverage here, and then doing a connection. Could say association, but in relational frame theory, we say relation, or metaphorically we say frame. It's a way of saying it's framed together as this thing that I'm drinking and the name coffee, and you see that it comes together. And now I can even say coffee. You don't see the cup anymore. You know what I'm talking about. If I say, hey, can I have a coffee? People can understand. So the sounds now have acquired meaning.
Yes.
It's a relational frame theory. It starts from this idea and then expands to a whole process of building meaning and interacting with people, with ourselves. Like I said, it goes all the way to spirituality in the sense of understanding how it's from a scientific perspective, not a religious perspective. So when I say spirituality, the way I'm defining it is not from a religious perspective, but that does not necessarily, it's not necessarily inconsistent. And I actually teach classes on spirituality from a psychological perspective at my university. So I've been quite interested in this topic lately. And the way we define it, not just in RFT actually, is an integration of relationship to oneself, to myself, to other, meaning my kids, but also everybody as a concept. So relationship with myself, with other, and a higher power, we can say, or God. It can be God. It can be it's whatever is at the highest level in the not necessarily in the hierarchy, because it would be higher like that, but more abstract, more. We say in some religions, Christian, at least the idea of God is everywhere, or everything is connected. All these concepts are very present in all spiritual traditions. And so you see how you can approach it as a relational activity. It's like I develop a relationship to myself, to you, and to the larger context. And all that, if it comes together in a harmonious way, integrated, then we can say that it's spirituality from our perspective, but we can also say it's harmonious. It's happiness in a way. And so I just want to give an example here, and it will help understand what RFT can be useful for. So if I approach spirituality in language from an RFT perspective, then I think of it as something that I do that I can learn, and that is influenced by the context, the history, developed with experience. Um, like I said, we learn language in social contexts with our parents, a community, and then it gets more complex, and then we think by ourselves, and then we learn with a lot of other experiences. So right now we are developing a connection, right? It started, hi, are you doing? Happy to be here. And like you just did it, right? I said something, you smiled, and I'm expecting that. I'm expecting this relational connection. Like I say something, I'm expecting that you understand and that you're going to produce a response in return that I can. It's the same thing as like a coffee cup in a way. It's like if I say, hey, can I have some more coffee? And then you pour some milk. And no, that's not what I want. I want some coffee. I think it doesn't match here. So I expect that the relation is going to be mutual and coherent. It's like we speak a language. We chose English because it works for both of us. It's a language that we can share, right? And it's already a precondition. I mean, like, how are we going to frame so that we're going to see, even with our different cultures and everything, we're seeing right now all these signs that it's like, think of it as a energy or a fluid that's going through a system. It's like, okay, if it doesn't work, wait, I'm not sure. It would be like there is a clog maybe in the channel, and then you're like, okay, what's going on? Oh yeah, of course it's cut there, so how can we repair it? Maybe I need to use another word, so now you understand, or I need to give an example, or maybe I'm saying something that is contradicting a belief that you have, and then it's like for you hard to connect, right? So it's like what we're doing in a way. We're building a network right now, as we're talking, even as you're listening mostly right now, but you're processing. That's in RFT we would say you're deriving, you're making sense, and then you ask a question, or maybe and then every time you're like, oh yeah, okay, right? It's okay, we're building that connection. So if we go all the way to spirituality, it's not just you, me, like that. Well, it has to be also me, also with myself right now. Like, am I honest with you, for example? Am I telling you something that I believe, right? Or am I pretending to be an expert and saying something, but in fact I don't really know? That would be uncomfortable for me, right? Even if that was not true, but if I feel that I'm not being honest, authentic, that it could be also because I'm distracted. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I have something on my mind, and so I'm thinking of something and I'm saying something else. Right? It's not necessarily wrong. It could be just things are not harmonious. Like I was saying that my parents were musicians, so I would hear them, rehearse a lot because it was classical music, the kind of music that you rehearse until it's perfect, and in false notes in classical music, it's really bad. you can't produce a false note in classical music. It has to be really perfect, or else it's disharmonious, and it's like, oh, something is wrong here. So it's the same idea here with the integration of self and you. Is that if I tell you something and at the same time thinking, what am I saying here? That's not right. It's not integrated. That's what I mean. Right? So we need that too. And when, let's say, with the higher power or God, it would be like, okay, well, how does that fit with the whole world in which we live? Like we are from different cultures, for example, but we have things that we share in common. You asked me questions about my history so that you can understand where I'm coming from. You told me a little bit about the Filipinos, so I can also understand. So we're building also a common ground, right? So that's in a way what RFT is all about. It's okay. Obviously, humans can do that. We are doing it. We don't need a theory to do it. But that's why I was saying about psychology. Even if you don't study psychology, you know psychology because you're human. But if you can understand it with a good theory and from a scientific perspective, then the potential is, you can help maybe people who struggle with language, to develop language, maybe like kids, and then maybe you can use this theory to help people who struggle with their thoughts,
Mm,
try to understand what's going on in their lives, maybe at a
mm,
basic level. Why am I not motivated to do my work? Why am I depressed? And then to more complex, even like
mm,
I don't know what I want to do in my life. What is the meaning of life? Or I have a I question my faith, or
mm,
it can touch on all these activities. So it's very
mm,
ambitious. It's not just a theory of language that is interested in like how we write, we read, or things like that. It's really all the human activity that is symbolic, all the meaning that we build. So it's actually really really central to everything we do. So I got interested in it because it's
mm,
so fascinating. There is so much in it. Um, and maybe I'll say more with the other questions that you have. But you see, it has led me now to you're asking earlier how I ended up at Bastyr. I
yeah,
I think again a sort of logical a chain of events. If
uh-huh,
I went back and if I wanted to build a story to tell you that everything was calculated from the beginning, you could almost
uh,
believe me because it really flows well.
uh-huh,
That I end
uh-huh,
up teaching about spirituality from a psychological perspective
mm,
in a place that combines science and alternative approaches. It's
mhm,
humanistic. It's in the US,
mhm,
and it's a country that I was very attracted to when I was young,
mhm,
especially through movies and things like that. So in a way, it's like, yeah, I'm exactly where I should be, you know.
mm,
And that's how I've been approaching my work and my career. And I think behavioral psychology is a good fit because it's very much interested in how we function as a process, as a
uh,
always the dynamic response to what's going on in the context. It's yeah,
okay.
maybe we'll say a little more about that.
All right. Wow. Okay. Now, that's something that I really struggled with studying RFT, how this language thing. And if you end up really, going into the weeds, it becomes rather simple, but at the same time, very confusing
Yep.
because it's very tricky, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
It's a bit like
So,
math in a way. Uh,
yes, yes, yes.
it's
It
like
makes
at first it's like
sense.
1 + 1 + 1, okay, and then you can go all the way to
Yes.
equations to understand the universe and all. And you don't have to necessarily go that far, you know, but it's the potential is very rich. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, yes. So that brings me, I think this would be a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about now. All right. So, um, I do work with people here, and some of the concerns that a lot of them, especially young people who are going into college, like you're
Mm-hmm.
basically the context of being in France
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
helped you pursue what you want. And in a
Yep.
country like ours, uh, the options are very limited in terms
Okay.
of what you learn from your parents, that your parents want you. uh, there's a Filipino American comedian in the US who would make jokes, I mean, in a very wholesome way, that
Uh-huh.
if you see a Filipino, it's usually a nurse in America, you know so
Yeah. It's
so
yeah.
uh I wonder how you would, let's say, I'm not sure if this is a will connect to RFT. How would you counsel or do psychotherapy with a young Filipino who wants to pursue a degree, let's say in arts or
Mm,
engineering,
mm,
but
mm.
his or her parents want him or her to go to nursing because that's the most practical thing to do.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a very common issue here.
Yeah. You know, it's what behavioral psychology has helped me do is recognize patterns
Mhm.
In the way I was thinking about those frames,
Mm.
beyond the particularities of what's in the pattern or what's in the frame. If you think of a frame,
Mhm.
what picture is inside, it matters what's in the frame. But
Mm.
it's also interesting to notice that you can put different pictures. The frame can contain different pictures and still works. So behavioral psychology, one of the greatest advantages it has to me is that you can get at different levels of understanding. And if
Mm.
you choose the right one, then you
Mm.
realize that you do understand or you do know something that can be useful to the question that you're asking. The risk is perhaps sometimes to think that you can talk about anything, have an answer, which is probably not true. But
Mhm.
when you describe the situation in Filipino in the particular question, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know the context. It's the first time
Mhm.
I hear about it,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
I'm thinking I'm trying to understand it with my framework, and I'm thinking that the problem that you're pointing is a matter with what I know. It's a matter of let's say, it's saying relationship integration, right? So here's relationship with myself. I'm the young guy, students, in
Mhm.
Filipino, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'd like to pursue a career in,
Yes,
you
yes.
know, example you were saying, maybe therapist, you said, or something else, or and
Maybe
then
an artist, or
maybe an
I like
artist.
to
Okay,
be
so
an artist,
yeah,
but my parents
okay,
want me to study, to go nursing, so I
okay,
can
yeah,
go abroad,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So my it means like, how do I know that I want to be an artist? There might be different motivations. It could be,
Uh-huh.
like it's like I personality pretty creative, and
Mhm.
I like to I'm sensitive to beauty and things like that,
Mhm.
um and then I maybe I've also I've seen
Mhm.
movies from actors, and I want to be an actor. I wanted to do that actually when I was a kid. I was passionate about cinema, and also it's like, oh, yeah, I want to do that. There's lots of influences.
Uh,
And then when it seems like everything's coming together, it's like, oh yeah, it's the right thing, right? It's like, that's what I know what it is because I feel it in my heart, and it's the right thing to do, and that's my model in life. It's like perfect. But here there's a mismatch somewhere. It's like, oh,
okay.
what about the culture? What about parents? They say something else.
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
so there is a threat to the relationship with parents, perhaps, like what are my parents going to
Yes.
say, or
Yes. Yes.
I would like them to be proud of me. But it's not just that. My parents maybe saying something that is very useful to listen to. Like they say, well, it's better for you and the future. Trust my
Uh,
experience. Being an artist, understand when you're 20, but life is hard, and it's good to hear that too. So there's also, we could say, a connection with myself in the future, which I don't know, and
mm.
my parents don't know it either, but they have something to say about being older and having a whole life. So in a way, they are saying, like right now, you're thinking, oh, I'll be fine and I'll enjoy life being an artist, but think also of the future, and okay, and then there's society too, society that's saying maybe different
Yes.
things, like
Yes.
now with internet, and I'm guessing the people in Filipino and people, they also have access to like the social networks and things like that. It's international. I don't know much about the culture and relationship with internet in Filipino, but it seems like it's everywhere now. The whole Twitter and Facebook and things like that, and that's a big source of influence that's not just in your own country often. Like I was very influenced by the
Okay.
American culture as a French,
Yes. Yes.
because it was TV at the time. It was not internet. It was TV, but we're influenced like that. And so the question that you asked, the problem to me, I understand it as a matter of integration. It's like, oh, something is not doesn't fit here. What am I going to do? Right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
we experience that every day to some extent. It's like, oh, what time is it? I need to take care of the children, but I also need to make food. And what time is it? And it's like, oh, what? And then we make a decision, right? Every moment is like that. But often we don't pay attention because it flows. If you have a schedule, you know what time you get up, you go to work. So
Yes.
you
Yes.
don't have that ambivalence. Everything's aligned. But perhaps
Yes.
after 10 years doing the same job, at some point you're like, what am I doing here? I'm bored here. So in fact,
Yes.
there's been a growing inconsistency battle in you that says, nah, that doesn't fit. I want things to be whole again. So now I've that I've set the context to sort of define the problem at that level, very abstract, then it's like, okay, and then let's get into the more particular. What is the nature of this inconsistency, of this ambivalence, this conflict? Is it just the family? Is it just a familial conflict? Or is it also social conflict? Is it financial? Is it how, there's a lot of things that can play there. So in some ways, the answer would have to be only individual, because, and as you know, as a therapist, you have to talk with one person and see, okay, why do you want to be an artist? What's important about it? And then, okay, what do your parents say? And what how do you relate to your parents' advice? Is it important to you to listen to them, or no, or why? And so you're trying to clarify a little bit of that. But if I approach it at a more group level, that's where I need more knowledge about the culture to understand. Now, what you describe is, I think, something we can observe in other cultures, and there's always a tension between generations, between the traditions and young people who often want to change things, and it's part of the always. I think across cultures, there's, even if certain cultures are perhaps more attached to traditions, and certain cultures think more in terms of cycles, return to things, and versus maybe more linear, where there's always a progression and things change. There's differences across cultures, but the tension between safety and exploration, novelty and predictability, I think it's everywhere, even in animals. So the answer is, okay, how do we resolve this tension? Not to end the tension, because it's always there. But how do we, what is the choice that I can make that's going to make me feel like it's right, that there's a harmony coming together until something new shows up, because like I said, you never know. You get married, it's the perfect person, and then the relationship is great, and then maybe things happen. You have kids, it changes the dynamic, or you move to another place and changes the dynamic. So we think that we can predict, but there's not much we can predict often, especially when there's a lot that is important, like a career choice. Perhaps what's motivating people to say you should be a nurse, it's more predictable, perhaps. The joke of the actor, what's his name? I'm not sure if I know this actor. I'm not. It's not just because he's Filipino. I'm not following the cinema very much anymore. But what's his name? I'll try to.
Well, his name is Jokoy.
Okay.
That's his acting name or screen name.
Okay.
Anyway, so
you're saying, like, if you see would you say a Filipino is probably a nurse in the US? Is that
yes.
Yeah, so it's a joke because it's predictable, and it's a joke because maybe it's like you never don't notice it, and then once it's said, it's like, oh yeah, there's some truth in it. I'm guessing. I have no idea, but and that's probably what's inside that piece of advice that the parents might share. It's like, well, you want to know that the future is going to be stable, that you're going to be able to. There is nothing less predictable and safe than being an artist, probably, in terms of career choice. But it's exciting. it's so one thing that I do when I work with with clients or with myself, it's like, how do we reconcile? You can be a nurse and be creative. You can be a nurse as an artist, in a way, to some extent. I'm not saying it fixes all problems, but I'm saying when we look at a more abstract level or a more very essential level, often we see that these things can connect much more than we realize. Just like I said about cultures, even though I don't know Philippine culture, I can make some connections if I look at the right level. Like, okay, well, it's a matter of ambivalence or conflict between parents. Okay, it exists everywhere. So Yeah, that's my answer is more from a psychological perspective because that's my expertise. But from a
Yes.
social perspective, I don't know all the
Okay.
context, but
All right.
it's
So yes, thank you for
yeah.
sharing that. So I probably have to limit my questions to something more, let's say, universal about RFT. Some things I learned from you and Stephen Hayes and all that. I often hear something like RFT helps improve. I often hear Stephen Hayes say this helps improve intelligence. In fact,
Mm,
it's even used for kids who have autism.
mm,
All right.
mm.
So, can you explain this more? How does
Yeah,
RFT
yeah.
or derive relational responding
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah,
make somebody more intelligent? Is that
yeah,
the word?
yeah.
I'm not so sure.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can say. So it's not my area of expertise in RFT, but I know I think enough to explain it. Um, so I was saying earlier, the advantage of this approach RFT is to think of language and intelligence also. It's a
Yes.
form of language as it's something that we do. It's an activity. It's a behavior. So it
Yes.
means it's something that we develop, we learn, and that to some extent we can shape, we can train, we can look at how it works. I mean, as far as we know, it's something we study, and then maybe we learn how to maybe
Uh,
develop it.
yeah.
And there are RFT researchers in Ireland, in particular, who have been working for the past 10, 15 years now
Uh,
on programs to so either to help people, kids who
mm,
have the difficulties in particular domains of intelligence.
uh,
It can be like social intelligence, for example. You mentioned autism, the ability to read emotions, to take the perspective of another person. Like I was saying
mhm,
earlier, like I'm reading your cues and I infer what it means. So
mm,
that's deriving, asking me derive
yeah.
relational responding.
Yeah.
It's a relational response right now, and it's deriving. I cannot read literally your thought, but I'm
Uh,
thinking, okay, if you're doing that, that means that you're focused, or okay.
mhm,
So that there is some people have difficulties in this domain. Some people are very, very
mm,
good at it. It's, okay,
mm,
RFT can help in this domain, for example, in every domain of intelligence, potentially at least,
mhm,
by identifying what particular kind of relational response is
mhm.
not developed enough, or could be more fluid, more fluent, more
Uh,
developed, like perspective taking. Like,
okay.
am I able to take your perspective to think like, if I were you right now and I would ask this question, what would that mean?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
projecting myself in the future, in the past, and maybe there is difficulties in doing it on time or in space, and then you can focus on that and train specifically this ability and
Mm,
see if it helps the person then develop that repertoire
mhm,
in their lives. And it's research that has been done. It's particularly Brian Roche, Sarah Cassidy in Ireland, other
mm,
researchers who work on these topics. That's what they seem to have seen. I'm not aware of the most recent literature, but it's like
mhm,
by training these abilities, then you can improve. It's a skill, basically, and
mhm, mhm,
then if we think of intelligence, not for people who have difficulties, but just normal people, and can they normal meaning not having particular difficulties, but normally developing kids, for example, and then adults, can we even improve their capacity? It's still something being researched, but my
mhm,
understanding is that it seems to be possible to some
mhm,
extent, and
mhm,
it makes sense given the theory. It's like, I think everybody can experience that. If you spend some time thinking about a topic, and you read about it, and you reflect about it, you talk with other people about it, you become better at it. You understand the problem better, you're able to talk about it better, and if you're trying to resolve a problem, it's going
mhm,
to become easier the more
mhm.
you relate to that. Just like, anything you learn in your, maybe that's where RFT is particularly good. It's approaching language as, in a way, as any other behavior. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to develop a particular skill in your life, you're
Mm,
going to choose the behavior that you want to improve, and then you're going to do some practice, you're going to learn how to do it, you get some feedback, and then you'll get fluent, just like in a new language, for example. So you can do that with intelligence. Now,
Yes.
to what extent can we improve intelligence? It's something that I'm not an expert in the domain, and
Yes.
it's probably still too early to tell. But it seems like RFT can has a potential to
Okay.
help in
All
this
right.
domain. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Uh, in connection to that, okay, we use the term. There's even chapters, or maybe even books written about rule-governed behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how do you see that in your, for people who are watching us who don't know much about psychology but are interested in seeking help or counseling or psychotherapy from someone like you, or someone here in the Philippines who's doing this? How can you cite some examples of
Sure.
when
Yeah.
rule governed behavior becomes a problem in life? uh, for example.
Well, you can start from the question you asked earlier. It's like,
uh,
it seems like it's a rule. I will define what it is in a moment, but
yes.
it seems like it's a rule in Filipino to be a nurse because it's
Yes,
a good
yes,
career, right? So
yes,
it's not necessarily a rule in the sense of it's obligated. If you don't do it, you're going to be punished necessarily.
yes,
Like the
yes,
term rule is usually employed to talk about the laws and or a game and what are the rules you need to respect. But conceptually, it's broader than that. You can think of it also as principle or belief, also
yes, yes,
instruction, or ways of trying to. I give you just a few synonyms so that we're not too stuck with this particular term, because sometimes it's misunderstood because of that.
mm,
Intentions to a plan. So, for example, if I say,
mm-hmm,
I in order to be to feel good, I need to see my friends often. That's a
yeah,
rule.
okay,
From our perspective, it's a principle. It's a theory, you could say. Also, it's like something that I know will, if I follow it,
yes, yes,
I will get the results that the rule says.
yes, yes,
Right? It's
okay,
you can think of it as a sort of make like a recipe. If you're cooking, there's a lot of
yes, yes,
rules in it. It's like
yes,
first you did, then do that, then do that, and then in the
yes,
end you have that dish that you're preparing, and it should taste the way it was supposed to and look the way it's supposed to. So it's a set of descriptions of the what you're doing, the behavior, and
mm,
what's going to happen. Remember what I said earlier about behavioral psychology, and
mm,
the key element is response, the influence of consequences. If I do something and then there's a consequence, then it's going to influence my response. Well, it's the
mm,
same thing here. If the rule says that
mm,
speaking clearly is going to lead to understanding from you and nodding, okay, well, then I'm going to try to speak clearly, and if you don't understand, I'm going to try to clarify, give you an example. And so
yes,
the
yes,
rule that I'm following helps me adjust my behavior. But if I
okay,
didn't have any rules about that, like I said, people who have difficulty with social intelligence, they might like that. Some people, it's because they have not learned it well in their childhood, for example, in their social
mm,
context. They did not learn the good social skills, how to interact with others, or it could be for other reasons. But so that's examples of rules. The rules can be about what is a meaningful life made of. What should I do
oh,
to have a meaningful life? Should I be married, have kids?
I should
Like I
have,
said earlier,
maybe here
yeah,
it's more about the meaningful life is having financial security,
yeah, maybe
because
it could be
we're in
that.
a developing country, so
Hmm.
our views are kind of limited to, oh, you shouldn't be worrying about your next meal, or
Mm,
the roof
mm,
above
mm,
your
mm,
head, that it's gonna
mhm,
rain tomorrow, that it's
yeah,
gonna fly
yeah,
off tomorrow,
yeah,
that
yeah. There
we're
is a
gonna
sense
be
more of a day-to-day
urgency. Yes.
urgency. I see.
Yeah.
I like I said, I don't know enough about your culture, especially
Mm,
in the country. So my experience is that it's always more complex than it seems,
yeah.
and that even when we are focused on very concrete things, daily things,
Mhm.
there is still a meaning and spiritual dimension in it. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not completely explicit, perhaps,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but you know, it's like this. You know the concept of the hierarchy of needs that was developed by a psychologist called Maslow in the 60s, I think.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's the idea is like it's often represented as a pyramid because at the first it's basic needs, so
Yes, yes.
food and being
Yes.
able to be warm enough, and then to remember all the levels. But it goes to the more abstract, so the more
Yes, yes.
spiritual self-actualization, and
Yes.
it was not actually meant to be a hierarchy in a linear way,
Stages.
as
It's
if,
not
yeah, it's not supposed to be understood that way, but over
uh
time it became like that. And
okay.
people often, I've noticed, think that you first need this and then you can do that and then you
Yes,
can do that.
yes.
It would be like, if then in that case you could only explore meaning of life, spirituality, if
At
you
the
have all
very
the first things. But that
yes, yes.
doesn't work like that. uh,
Oh.
no, because people who are depressed might lose appetite, for example. In fact, that's very common. They don't want to get up anymore. They don't want to do these basic things. Why?
Mm.
Because there's no purpose. And so what are you
Mm.
going to do? They can eat, like I'm talking about people who have they have food. It's not like they don't eat because they don't have food. They can, but
Yes.
they don't want to, or they would like to want, but it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Like very commonly you see people who will say that like they have everything they need, they should be happy,
Yeah.
and they're not, and they don't understand why. Maybe
Yeah.
because they approach all these stages
Uh
without considering that meaning needed to be infused all along. That's one way of thinking about it.
I see.
So you see, I go back
Okay.
to your first question when I talked about my motivation, what brought me to psychology. To me,
Yes,
that's
yes.
an example of actually having that meaning. uh, I'm not saying it was all perfect and all, but to me, the part about being passionate about what I was doing
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily having a specific goal, that's an example of that interconnection. Like
Mm.
I was able, like, probably to explore perhaps more than maybe other students who
Yeah.
had a very clear career path. I remember I had classmates and friends who they knew what they wanted to do from the beginning, and they got to their career, they finished their stage much earlier, and then they had their career and all, and then maybe they're very happy. I'm not saying they're not happy, but um, they for me it didn't work that way. I needed to sense that it was meaningful, not necessarily knowing what concretely I was going to do, but that it was
Okay.
meaningful. So trying to reconnect with when I started to talk about the hierarchy of needs. Oh yeah, because we were saying that the daily motivation. My guess is that it's not just about that in Filipino. So again, I want to be
Mm.
cautious because I don't know, but I don't think there's any culture, any human
Yeah.
who's not spiritual. Actually, they might not think
Yeah.
about it that way. And I'm not talking just
Yes.
about religion. I'm talking about the importance of having meaning in your life. Like
Yes, yes.
people they might get up, work hard, but they also think of their family, right? I need to work
Yes.
hard, so I need to bring food to my family. They might not have the time, the energy, or even the interest in exploring things that could be considered essential here because of the
Mm.
money and all the resources.
Mm.
But it's it doesn't mean that the, the the again, it's a matter of how it's expressed,
Okay.
you know. Like, trying to give a concrete example here. um I give an example just for me, because I can compare the cultures without knowing enough. But um
Mm.
if I consider that connecting with my
Uh-huh.
family is important, it's a concept that's pretty broad, then
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that I can do it. It's not just when we are all together and sharing a meal for a special occasion. That's great, that's a very
Okay.
special moment, but that happens
Okay.
a few times in a lifetime, especially for me. Left my
Yeah.
country
Yeah.
of origin, so I don't see them often. And like I said, I haven't left Seattle in 2 years. So if I were thinking that the only way I connect with my family is when I see them in person, that means that I have
Yeah.
no connection with them in 2 years, right?
Yes. Yes.
But there's lots of other things, even just talking about them right now, thinking about them.
Mm.
So it's this idea of hierarchy like that, and
Mm.
where developing countries would still be at this level, taking
Yeah,
care of
yeah.
food and everything, and then maybe if you get there, you will be able to. I don't believe it works that way at all. In fact, often I would say it's the opposite, because
Oh,
you get also
oh.
yeah, because the more options you have and freedom and the more you can get distracted by things that, sure, it's great to have options. I'm not going to say our life is harder. No, it's not. It's just that it's not necessarily better in terms of integration of everything, because when you have a
Uh-huh.
lot of options, I've experienced it, moving from France to the US. The US is, everything is has to be very, very free. You need to have a lot of choice and options. It's very strong in this culture. So you go to stores and you want to just buy some milk, and there's not just one kind, there's 10, 15 kinds.
Uh,
And it's a struggle, because you have to think of which one you want, which one is really good for you, because it's sold doesn't mean it's necessarily good. I mean, to some extent, yes, but in France, things are more regulated in what is sold. Yes, it's more open, so you have to make your own choice, and the result is that it can still be hard to know what to do with your life. So it's like when I'm definitely not making the case that life is harder. I don't know. I think it's, you will find this tension, this dynamic everywhere. And I do think that the connection of meaning and really concrete physical needs is always necessary everywhere
uh,
you are, and all the time. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle for sure. And
well, that.
RFT, I think,
Mhm.
can. I'm not gonna say RFT can help. I think a lot of things can help. Religion, spiritual traditions, philosophy, everything. But RFT
Uh,
can study this particular process, and I think has an interesting way of approaching it. Perhaps we can say a little more with another question if you want to. I don't remember if you wanted to talk at some point about values or things like that, but that's something I could develop a little more. So at some point.
yeah, actually, that's an eye opener to me. I really thought Maslow meant that you have to take care of the basic needs first before you go up. So that's how I patterned my life.
And I was surprised. I was surprised too. It's like the stages of grief, like the person who developed that
Yes,
first
yes.
she didn't, I forgot her name, but she didn't mean it as
Kubler-Ross.
a particular
Yeah,
order.
yeah,
And but then over time, it starts with what are the different kinds, and then it's
yes,
listed, and then people start to think one, two, three. I mean, of course, Maslow meant basic, and then he may have come up with a pyramid. I'm not sure, but what I read, it could be wrong, but I read explicitly that it did not say that it had to be in a chronological order, or there was a
yes,
specific. And I agree that there's need that some needs are more basic and others are
yes,
more abstract, but it doesn't mean it's one first then the next,
yes.
because once you have acquired all that, like a kid learns language, and then once they have language,
Uh,
there's the physical, there's language, and the symbolic, and then it's interconnected. You cannot
uh,
separate it anymore.
yeah,
Think of it as you can make a soup.
yeah.
Is that something typical in
Soup, yeah,
the food of a Filipino?
yes,
Uh, so I mean, most cultures probably, but so you make soup and then you put ingredients in it, and particularly of soup, it's because it's liquid, things gets mixed, and you cannot separate it easily. It's not like a dish where you can okay, maybe I put a little
yeah,
too much meat, I'm gonna remove a few pieces. In the soup, it's harder. You can if you put some chunks of things, but if it's like say salt and then oil, and then, well, it's in there, right? You're not gonna
yes,
try
yes,
to remove it. Okay,
yes,
so it's meaning in life. Once it's developed, it's there. It's just you cannot remove it. It's impossible. Like I I don't know your culture very well, but I bet it's true also in your culture, and perhaps I'm wrong. We'll see. It will be a test. Um, in France, in the US, in most cultures that I know, kids, there is a stage at which they ask a lot of questions, and why,
why, yeah,
why, right? I'm guessing because I think it's a human thing. It's what leads to then um, rules, as we were saying. Like you understand how things work. It
yeah,
helps you predict. It helps you
okay,
um, adjust your behavior. You want to know why, the purpose. And so
Uh,
kids, they are great because they don't know yet those rules, and for them it's like everything is possible from a social perspective. There is no rule at first. It's like, I want to
okay.
be fed. I cry, I'm fed, and then
Yes.
progressively the things get more complex, and then there are rules, contingencies, we would say in behavioral terms, that become less um, it's never really arbitrary, but it can start to feel arbitrary. It's like, well, why do we have to say hello? Kids will ask
Mm.
things like that, or, oh, but why can't I? My daughter, she says things like that all the time. It's like, she wants to take, like stuffed animals or toys when we go out to a playground, and I know she's not gonna play with it there. It's not. She has it with her in the moment. She wants to keep it, and she said, oh, I want to take it there. And I know that what's going to happen is that once we're there, she will ask me to carry it. And so, but for her it's like, oh, but why not? Or sometimes it's things that they want to wear. It's like,
Uh,
that you should not put these things together. You can, but it's like, and actually it's a good way of reflecting on our own rules, because kids, they come, it's like culture. You go to another country and there are new things, and you say, oh, why do you do this, why do you do that? And then often people would say, oh, I never thought about it, because you come from another country, you ask me these questions, and for me it's obvious, and I never thought about it. And kids would do the same thing. They say, why? And so once you have developed that, once you're used to thinking in terms of purpose, meaning, the why,
uh,
especially if it's been not punished but instead encouraged,
yes, yes.
like the curiosity, because in some cases, unfortunately, I would say, it's shut down in kids. Like, don't ask why, that because I said so. And then
Yeah,
you have to follow the rule,
yeah,
a bit like a robot. It's like you have to,
yeah.
uh, I mean, you cannot always explain everything to kids, of course, but um, on the continuum, I worry about kids that are too much to just follow what they're supposed to, because then they are
Mm.
not learning to think for themselves, and they cannot uh, choose what they want to do in their lives as well, because
Mm-hmm.
they have not learned to explore, to question. My sense of good parenting is to let that kind of dynamic happen. I do the same with my students, clients. It's like,
Mm.
ask me why, and we'll talk about it. Maybe I have an answer, maybe I don't have an answer, maybe we'll figure it
Mm.
out together. And so, just to link it back to what I was saying earlier, once you think that way, once you have that in your repertoire, you can take it out of the soup. It's impossible. It's like you need a purpose for what you do. You may not think about it all the time. Like
Mm.
right now, I'm talking, I'm not thinking, oh, why are we doing it? But I need to have that available, or else, in fact, I know it happens. I go on because I talk and make connections, and then I say, okay, wait, what are we doing here? Okay, think of time, your answer. I need to be able to refocus on the purpose right now, or
Okay.
else it's just it goes all over the place. Like I said earlier, I could be depressed because I don't see any purpose in what I'm doing. What's the point? Like,
Uh,
who cares, and then so, but it's gonna be a struggle, because in fact I cannot remove it. I need it. It's like, it seems like it's not there, but it's there, because now I've learned that my life needs to have a purpose. You see what I
mm.
mean?
Mm. Yeah. I remember in some cases where, parents have a different rule about how kids need to do some things, and kids learn something, that they're different from their parents, from the way, they see
Mm-hmm.
it in the classroom, or maybe they see it on social media or anything like that. So yeah, I can see where, just in my memory, I can see some of the cases where the rules of the parents
Mm-hmm.
conflict to the rules of the child,
Yeah.
or the rules of the husband conflict to the rules of the wife,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and uh, you know the rules of the
And rules
employee.
inside in the rules inside myself too. The rules that like for me, I'm a very young father. I have very young kids, and that's
Mhm.
for a lot of people when they become parents, it starts to there's be a conflict between what I should do as a parent, what I should do in my work, and then so
Mm.
it's a conflict of rules. Often you need to find a way to integrate to make it work, or else you
Mm.
are split, you're fragmented, and it can be with other people, with society, with yourself. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'd like to pick your brain.
Yeah, the
That's
concept of rule
very.
is a really good one for approaching
I'm sorry.
a lot of topics. Really, I said the concept of rule that you asked the question, what are rules? And it's a pretty simple concept, but like I
Yeah.
said, with all these concepts, they are simple at first, and then you expand, and you're like, oh wow, it's actually really useful to think about it.
Exactly. Well,
To think this way. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, Let me talk about the elephant in the room. I don't know if I'm using the right metaphor here.
Mm.
Uh, I often listen to Stephen Hayes. He has a lot of guestings on podcasts and all that,
Yeah.
YouTube videos. Uh, I heard he talked about he's wondering. Okay, the elephant in the room is a pandemic.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so we're probably missing out on something if we don't talk about it. All right, and it's a big
Sure. Yeah.
problem in your country, in my country as well. All right, there's a large, not he- large minority. It's not a majority; it's a minority, but it's a big chunk of the population that are anti-vax or vaccine hesitant. All right, and I heard Stephen Hayes say something like, "Well, why are you letting the virologist or the epidemiologist talk convince people to get the vaccine? You should have a psychologist or somebody who knows about how the
Yeah.
mind works to
Yeah.
help people, to encourage people to
Yeah.
and there's all these are we going to limit access to people who are not vaccinated? Are we going to make it hard for them to get their to get to the movies or something like that?
Yeah.
So how can RFT a science more worthy of the human condition, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
CBS.
Well,
How
the
can
CBS.
RFT
Yeah.
or CBS help
Mm.
in this situation that we find ourselves in?
Yeah. So CBS, I didn't define earlier, it's a contextual behavioral science, which
Yes.
is almost a synonym for behavioral psychology, but let's not get too much into it. It's like the broader science in which RFT is situated by focusing on language and cognition.
Yes.
CBS is behavior in general, and then RFT is really specific to that, although
Yeah.
it's very broad. And then a broader, we could say psychology, and then broader, we could say science and all. I think psychologists have been, I guess, complaining about the same thing that Steve is complaining about. Skinner, the first main figures of behavioral psychology, a really, really important psychologist in the US who worked from the 30s through the 80s. He wrote a few books that explicitly said, we've made a lot of progress with science, all the things that we can do now, but like in terms of medicine, in terms of technology, transportation, and things like that. But there's an area in which we need to make progress. That's what we need to do now to focus on, or else we may even actually suffer from the progress that we've made with science. At that time, give examples of how science can lead to technological development that are then the cause of suffering. And we talk about it now all the time. At that time, it was things like I think it was talking about pollution or the nuclear bomb and things like that. Now it's like technology is everywhere. So we can almost never talk about our problems without linking it to some extent to, well, that's because of our way of life, or the way we have developed all the technology. We're on internet, on smartphones, on these things, and then the pollution, and then we travel too much. And then the pandemic is an example too. It's like, well, if we didn't travel that much, the pandemic would not have spread, the virus would not have spread as fast and as everywhere. It's, I mean, of course, it happened before. There's been other pandemics in the history, but the spread, of course, is been different given how fast we travel nowadays. And on the other hand, information has also circulated in a different way with the internet and all. And that's, I think that the role of psychology is for sure they could be useful, because like I said, there is psychology in delivering a message, trying to influence. Politicians do that. That's what they do.
Yes.
Epidemiologists and everything. If you communicate and you want to be understood, like the sort of main figure in the US who talks about who's the epidemiologist, Dr. Fauci, is he's been a very patient person and all, very empathetic and all. And then over time, you can see that he's gotten very frustrated lately. He said a few things that seem to show like he's getting frustrated. I don't know. Context must be difficult to do this job. I don't know, but it's just that, okay, he wants to be heard and he wants people to do what he thinks is best. Totally understandable. I do the same with my kids, with my students, with with people I'm driving, and I'm like, why are you not moving faster? That's why. Yeah, it's all the time. It's like, I see it in a certain way. I know it's right. Why are you not saying it that way? So we all have that sort of thing. Psychologists, it's interesting. I think, yes, I think it would be good if they were involved. I don't think it would be good if they were the ones in charge only of taking care of it, because I think there's flaws also in the discipline. We always end up seeing things from one perspective and missing things. Just like probably epidemiologists, and it's been talked about, they focus on the virus, eliminating the virus, how it can spread. No, they're not psychologists. So not only they maybe not be the best to deliver a message, although they probably learn that in their training and with experience, but that's not their domain of expertise, the communication and all. And also, they are not experts in the consequences of their policies from a psychological perspective, like confinement. We cannot travel anymore. We need to wear masks. I said not aware. That's not true. They're aware of it. They talk about it, but that's not their domain of expertise. And as a result, I think I'm not the only one. They don't take it seriously enough. So there's two aspects here, I think, in what I don't know if Steve has both in mind here, but to me, that these two aspects are important: is how we communicate effectively, how we transform how influence people's behavior. Once we decide, okay, the best thing is people wear masks, for example, or vaccination. I'm not even making a judgment about it. I think that's not the point here. Could have different opinions even, but let's say we decide that's what's best. As the people in charge say that's what's best. Okay, how are we going to influence people? Well, if it's an authoritarian country, you know what's going to happen, right? It's like you force people, you can put people in jail, things like that. That's the extreme. Yes. On the other side, it's like, no, people do whatever they want. And in the middle, most countries, it's like, okay, well, we don't want to force people, we don't want to punish them, but we need to influence them. And it's a context that's new, where first of all, it's hard to make the right decision because there's a lot of factors. And like I said, psychological factors are important, and I don't think they've been considered enough. And then it's okay, how do we deliver it, influence people? But it's not just the problem is not just to change people's behavior. It's to do it in a way that respects the values of our society.
Okay.
Yeah, because like it's easy to agree, at least you and I in this context, to say, okay, we don't want to put people in jail because they don't get a vaccine. That seems like that would not be right. That would not be right. To me, from my culture, it's like, no, that's we could talk about why, by the way. That's the kid, like why, but why, because after why not, right? It's important to have an answer to that, by the way, because if not, then you can drift away. You need to know why. And yeah, I haven't thought of it specifically, so I don't have a quick answer, but I know that I would not want that. But then, okay, there's that orange where we say, oh, it's acceptable if we psychologists are good to influencing people. Yeah, but we don't want to manipulate people, I think. I don't think that would be good. Sure, I can come up with ideas of how to frame a message, I'm an expert in language, that's going to lead people to want to get vaccine, how they, but to what extent is it going to be me deciding for people what they should do and know how to say it? It's like seduction, I will buy you a house and we'll have a wonderful life and everything. And, and then it's like, well, where is it? It's fine that we cannot predict completely what's going to happen, of course, and we need to make a decision. But I think it's important to be transparent also even when we influence people. In the kind of therapy that I do and my teaching, and you've seen that in my training, the stance is first we call experiential, and it's very similar to what I said about the encouraging kids to ask why, not be afraid of it. It's like, I don't want to teach people to do something. So whether it's clients, students, kids, or if I were doing politics, I don't influence people. Even if I think it's good for them, I don't want to take away their sense of autonomy, agency. We use this term. It's like, I know why. It really comes down to that. I know why. And even if people may not have a choice sometimes, it's like, well, if I were, if I don't respect the driving rules, I'm going to get into trouble, and I could go to jail if I do something really wrong. And so in a way, I don't have a choice. But knowing why, well, because if not, we would have an accident. And, we have to be careful. We need to be able to drive. It helps accept it. And it helps. You remember what I said about integration of self, other, higher power? It's the same thing here. Now, when I drive slowly, I'm like, okay, I don't want to get into trouble, but also I don't want to have an accident with another person. I don't want to risk hurting someone. And, I have to respect society. I also need to trust that people are making decisions. So when everything feels right, then it's like, okay, I think that's good. That's a society health, I think, can be, health at every level can be assessed, to me, based on that measure of integrity. And so my worry, I don't know what Steve has in mind, that we haven't talked about it explicitly, but I've heard things like that. And, psychologists have been used in the US by government agencies. They've been used by the CIA. They've been used by candidates for the presidency. Obama had a consultant in social psychology for his first campaign or second campaign, I think, second campaign.
Oh, yeah.
Some very famous one, that Robert Cialdini is a very famous social psychologist. He wrote books about influence and all. And I think it was in the panel of psychologists who were consulted by the Obama's campaign in 2012. Yeah. And so nothing wrong with that. I mean, this is, as you ask people for help and then can be paid for something. Okay. But nothing wrong with that, as long as, to me, as long as the psychologist works, it's not just influencing people to do what is good for them. I think it's not enough. To me, it's important that people also know what you're doing to some extent. It's honesty with the degree of like that's what I do with my kids. It's like, I know they can't understand everything yet. If I start to explain the whole reasons why we have to go to school and it's time to get up, and if I go all the way to, in the future you'll have a job, no, my daughter is 3, I'm not gonna do that. But I can at least say certain things that she can understand that are true. Like, I'm not going to say to her, if you go to school, you're gonna have a great day. I don't know if she's gonna have a great day. I'm not going to say, well, because I said so, you have to go. That's authoritarian, and that doesn't help her understand why and get why she does what she does. So she ends up just doing what I do. I don't want to say, if you go to school tonight, you'll have candies, because it's too disconnected from the experience of going to school. and then it's like, oh great, she wants to go to school, but just to have candies. It's not. I want to
Mm.
help her get in touch with what's intrinsically beneficial in going to
Mm.
school. So what can I
Mm.
do? I can say, oh, you're going to see your friends. Yesterday you said that you had a good time with your friends, and don't you want to see them? And sometimes my daughter says, no, I don't want to.
Mm.
So when you use this approach, you have to be ready for the response to be different than what you want. And that's why
Mm.
often teachers, parents, politicians, they don't like to do it that way, because they're afraid that if they let people they're in charge of think too much, contradict
Mm.
them,
Mm.
everything's gonna fall apart. Like, what if
Mm.
we let people ask questions? Why would we need to wear a mask? Why do kids need to wear a mask at school when most studies, from what I read, are not very conclusive that it's helpful?
Mm.
Then so it's better to not let people question that, and present it
Mm.
in a way that's going to make them believe that it's the right thing. So then we can come up with campaigns showing kids wearing a mask, and parents say, it's commercial, and so
Mm.
psychologists, if they are used for that kind of thing, I actually don't think it's a good idea, because it could
Okay.
actually lead to a worse situation where people are manipulated instead
Okay.
of and I'd rather be under pressure to do something, but I know what you're doing.
Okay.
Like, you're telling me, if you don't wear a mask, you go to jail. But at least you're clear in you're honest. Then, well, I mean, it depends. I say I prefer. It depends on the consequence. It depends on what you're asking me to do. Of course, wearing a mask, jail is pretty okay.
Mm.
But my point is, I I worry about the lack of honesty, transparency
Mm.
that the use of psychology could lead to
Yeah.
in the way we manage societies.
Yeah.
And as psychology develops and we're getting better at using it at a large scale level, and that's something that CBS is interested in, we have to be very careful with that, I think.
Okay. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I misunderstood Steve. Maybe
No, I
I
doubt it. I think, no, I doubt it. I think knowing him, I think it's your question, I understood it as
uh,
uh, we should use more psychologists because they're experts in influencing behavior and in
yes.
knowing how to talk to people, and that makes sense. I'm not against that, but
Uh,
I also want to present that side, because
mhm.
I think we can get excited about science, and probably American culture is pretty strong, and since the American culture influences the whole world still,
Yeah. Yeah.
then we look at the US and we're like, oh yeah, they know what to do. They really get this right. It's
Yes.
but
Yes.
not necessarily. It's
Yeah.
it it's when there's a progress, when we develop a technology, it's like we
Mhm.
also have to consider how it's going to change the
Mm.
system, the dynamic,
Okay.
and being able to influence people too well. I want to say there's there's a risk in it too. It's
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Like,
All
people won't
right.
question anymore. But if psychologists include that kind of um, uh, what I'm describing here, the importance of developing people's autonomy,
Mhm.
then I'm all for it. I think it's actually a good idea.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, maybe this would be my coup de grace, my last question,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
which goes down to the philosophy
Yeah.
behind RFT or CBS,
Hmm. Hmm.
all of this.
It's a good
Uh,
way of wrapping
yeah,
up,
and
actually.
and and how we can relate it to everyday life. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I attended one of Dr. Hayes' workshops, and he recommended this book by Stephen Pepper. Okay,
Hmm. Hmm.
A World
World
Hypothesis.
hypothesis. Hmm.
Yes, and with my other readings, I think it's more about two main ways of seeing things or
Hmm.
thinking. This the mechanistic and the
Hmm. Hmm.
contextualist. All
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
in everyday life, okay, uh, with partly explaining it to the ordinary person.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah,
because I've been reading the book and it's really hard.
yeah.
It's
You know,
philosophical.
I've not read it, but I've been
Yeah.
talking with a good friend of mine, Fabian Mairo, who's a Argentinian, is a
Yeah.
psychologist in Buenos Aires, and
Yeah.
he's been he read the book. We talked about it, so I I learned a little more about the content, but the rest of it I knew from the articles of Steve. Um, so there's actually more than the mechanistic and contextualist. There's different uh, other kinds to
Yeah.
but
Formism.
that's the
Yeah.
yeah, and that's the two that are often mentioned in the context of psychology and clinical psychology, because um, the I think it's the two form philosophies are in not necessarily completely in opposition, but that's what Steve developed with ACT
Yes.
is was really meant to emphasize that distinction, context versus mechanism. But there are other things that we could highlight too. So,
So
what is
let's
the
say
difference?
if you are, let's say, a father or an employee or a child or a student or a husband or a
Yeah,
spouse or a wife,
yeah, yeah,
you know, how it's always a big question to me. How can this, even as a therapist or a counselor, how does this inform you in terms of how you behave in those
yeah,
roles? You know,
yeah. Well, yeah. So,
so maybe first
uh,
explain to our
sure.
audience what,
Yeah.
in
Well,
simple terms,
this.
what's
Yeah,
mechanism, what's
yeah,
contextualism,
yeah.
yeah, and then how does it apply to, let's say, your role as a father.
Yeah,
How do you become a
sure.
mechanistic, how can you become mechanistic
Yeah.
sometimes and of contextualist sometimes,
Well, I
right?
think, I mean, it's the you know the papers. The idea of root metaphors is that it's saying it's like so yeah, mechanistic is like you approach humans as machines or
Okay.
yourself as a machine, and
Okay.
it works to some extent. It's like, in fact, we often say that, right, in medicine. Oh yeah, it's the body functioning like a machine, and it's like the brain. And yes and no, because the machine is not alive. It's not. It interacts with the context too, like a car. Okay, if a stone, I drop a stone. Well, it's not a machine; it's an object. So let's stick with machine. A TV, computer. Okay,
Mm.
it can be complex. It can even function. It seems like it functions itself, right? But you plug it to electricity and all these things. Okay, but the particularity is that it's fixed, so that I can take pieces out of it, replace them, fix it. Like,
Okay.
in a way, a computer is will never die because I can always replace pieces. In
Okay.
in practice, we don't do that because it would be too expensive, and then you want to buy a new one, or same with cars. Okay, but
Okay.
technically you can, because it's not alive. So it's like, well, all you need to do is replace the pieces, the pieces, right? It's possible,
Mm.
because nothing is going to be lost at some point. And what I said earlier, the question earlier about the influencing people and the importance of autonomy, that's not something you have to worry about with machines. You can
Okay.
manipulate them, change them, dismantle them, decide what you're going to do with it, because they're not people. They don't have their own feelings. They don't have their own motivation, desires, and all these things. So you don't have to worry about it. You can be very unilateral. You can intervene on a machine. I'm going to
Okay.
fix the machine. It can
Okay.
be complex.
Okay.
It's not necessarily simple, but
Yes.
it's very like I said, unilateral. And so the problem in approaching humans like that in psychology is
Mm.
that, well, it leads to what I was saying earlier. It's about the problem with manipulating people. It would be like, well, I know how to influence people, so we're going to deliver the
Uh,
message in a certain way, and then they're gonna start going to get vaccines.
yeah. Yeah.
That's like an example of mechanism, because it's very linear. Like, I know what's good for them, I'm going to get them to do that, and then
Okay.
they will do whatever. It's like authoritarianism is a form of mechanism. I think it's,
Uh-huh.
well, you know, well, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
You treat people like they are your objects. And in parenting, it's the same thing. It's like, well, because I said so, so you're going to do it. It's it's like, wait a second, and it's hard to if you take extremes, you get it, and most people be like, I don't want to do that. But in between, it's much harder. Every day I can catch things and I'm like, maybe I was like, I could say, here I treated my kid maybe more like objects that I hate saying that, because like, oh, what are people going to think here? But I'm trying to be honest. It's like, I feel like I'm on a rush and I need things to go fast, and my daughter gets a little upset, and I'm like, okay, let's go, we need to go, or and then in that moment, it's not that necessarily that I tell her to go fast. It's not that. It's that in that moment, maybe I'm talking to her as if I was talking to like nowadays we have robots and, hey, can you play that music or things like
Yes,
that, and it's
yes,
like,
yes.
because I said so, it's going to happen.
Yes, yes.
Fortunately, humans don't let themselves be treated like that. Sometimes in the short term we do. Something it can take a long time. Sometimes a whole life, and a whole society can let sometimes the government do that, and then at some point you cannot take it anymore. There's a revolution, something like that. But
Yeah, yeah.
often what happens is that it's more like, hey, I don't talk to me like that. Hey, I'm not going to do it just because you tell me to do it. It's like we react against that. So
Okay.
mechanism, it would be, it's a dead end, because you force you force things, or you think you can fix a person
Mm-hmm.
as if they're okay. Yeah, I can do this and do that, and then you'll be good, and then you can leave. And no, and so that leads us to contextualism and the difference. In contextualism, the approach is that people live in context. They interact with the context.
Okay.
Right? So I was saying earlier, the relationship between what I do and the consequence. Consequence is the context. It's like, okay, right
Yeah.
now you're
Uh-huh.
you're my main context, because when I talk, I look at you and I pay attention to your reactions, your questions. So I try to. But there's also the things that I'm thinking of. That is my context, my history, and the light, the time of day. All these things are part of my experiences, we could say, also things that I'm interacting with, and that
Yes, yes.
influence me at each moment. You know, and so I'm responding to all that. All these things influence me, and I influence it. It's a dynamic between the context and me, right? So you and I are interacting with each other. I am your context, and
Yes.
you are my context, and
Mm-hmm.
together we're interacting, and we're going to be the context of people who listen to this podcast. And so it's not fixed, like, here's the context, here's the behavior, the person. It's more, we go back to the first question, and it's like the relation. It's a relation, it's a dynamic, it's a relational dynamic.
Okay.
So the results of a different approach like that is that it's less, you cannot control it the same way. We could say you cannot control it at all,
Mm.
because uh, because as soon as you're touching or trying to influence, you're transforming it, and so then it's already, your prediction is already different. It doesn't necessarily match. For example, um, going back to the pandemic and using psychology, you think, oh, vaccination is the best for people. Okay, fine, let's assume that. Then we say, how can we deliver the message so that people are going to massively go vaccination? Okay,
Mm.
let's show the positive aspects. Let's say this. Let's say, okay, great, people vaccinate. But you approach it, as I said, mechanistically. Like, you know that people need to do that, and then they're going
Mm.
to do it, and we don't have to. We have to take into consideration their feelings, what they think about it. So it's like, even if it's not by forcing them physically, it's still, I know better,
Mm.
right? So I know what to do. I can control, I can predict, I can control, and that's what's
Uh,
going to happen. Well, maybe you'll get to 100% of the population vaccinated,
mm.
but what did you lose there? Well, just like with your kids, I've seen people
Mm.
who have kids who behave exactly what they are told to. And
Okay.
at first glance, you might think that they are wonderful kids, and wow, they wonderful
Yeah.
parenting, and look
Yeah.
at that, they are so kind, polite, and they never. And that part of it might be true. It's not all or nothing. But then you can also see. I'm not making prediction necessarily. It's complex, but I've seen the trajectory of, I work more with adults, and then you explore their childhood, and it's like, yeah, my parents, no, they didn't let me choose too much. They were pretty strict, and all that. The struggle often is around, like, people have a hard time knowing what they want. Go back to one of your questions, it's like, I don't trust myself because I was not trusted when I was a kid. I didn't learn to trust myself because I had to do what I was supposed to do. Or even when my parents would praise me or would say, yeah, go ahead, you can do what you want. Now I look back and I understand that they were influencing me to actually do what they wanted.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can manipulate each other without realizing it often. It's like, say, oh, you look good today. It's very, very nice. Oh, thank you. But maybe you're influencing someone to wear what you want to wear, or maybe you're being nice because that way they will do something in return. So that's mechanistic, because you have an agenda and you're going from one place to another. You're controlling, like you have a robot, and they can. We talk a lot about artificial intelligence these days. It's like, right now they're still robots. They still do what we tell them to do, and even when they can have a conversation, it's still based on how we program them. The question is, are we going to develop robots so that at some point they will have their own agency? There's lots of movies and TV shows about that. That will mean at some point that they have autonomy of thinking, maybe even feelings. It depends how we define it. And the concern is like, well, but then maybe we created a new species, and then how do we treat them? Because then do we have to give them rights? Some movies about that. So contextualism, it's a different take, because it's like, well, where does the you start and where do I start? We're in an interaction here. We're intertwined. Like even when I said you're the context, you're my context. Well, we can also say we're building a context together. Etymologically, context meant it's like knitting. It's like string threads together. Like when you build like a sweater, and it's like threads coming together. So context is not a thing. It's a coming together of things. It's a relating process. So contextualism means we're never going to approach humans as fixed pieces and say, here's the brain, here's the heart, and here's the thing, and here's people behaving, and here's the context that's going to do this and that. No, it's much more dynamic. And it's a way of thinking that actually is developing more and more in science in general. We see it in computer science, we see it in physics, in really literally astrophysics, and literally everywhere, in part because the technology has helped us develop ways of modelizing in terms of mathematics, the complex models that are not fixed, not linear. It's like pandemics actually did the same thing. It's not like you do this, then something is going to happen. It's that you do this, then something is going to happen, and then it's going to change the result of what you were thinking, because it's like, oh, well, I thought it was a good decision, but now that the result is what I wanted, it has changed things completely differently. So now we're back to we're more and more understanding how the world can function in multi-directional ways. And so I think going back to the question about the politics,
like in everyday life. Wow.
Yeah, well, in everyday life, it's like everything really. It's like, and it's hard to deal with
Let's
it,
take the
because it's like,
example
well,
of your daughter, or your child going.
Yeah, but it's like there's no simple answer in a way. When you're a contextualist, it's like, okay, what should I do now? Because she doesn't want to go to school. So what's the context? Okay, it's like she's tired, and but maybe I can draw her attention to she's going to see her children then, and okay. So you see, I'm using the context by connecting her to part of the context that might make it more likely for her to want to go to school, or for me to acknowledge her difficulties. But if you that's better than mechanism, perhaps, to some extent, because it's taking into account what is important for her, what motivates her. But if you really want to move completely to contextualism, not just a mechanism with a little bit of context. You have to understand that it's more of a whole dynamic, and that it's not fixed. Here's the context, here's the person. It's like where it's like the soup thing I was saying earlier. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can continue this metaphor to finish. It's like, Yona said, soup mechanistic would be like, okay, great, I can remove the salt, I can put the salt back, the test, and no,
Oh, okay.
it's like, no, it's in it's mixed. You want more? You want it to feel less salty? You're gonna have to add something there. You're gonna have to and accept that there's going to be an interaction between the salt that's already in it and something
Mm,
else. I
yeah.
suppose you could add sugar if you want it to be sweeter, or you can add
Uh,
tomato or something. I'm not really an expert in cooking, but there's lots of
mm,
ways that you can change. And so contextualism is it's really like things are interconnected in such a way that you cannot really separate any pieces. You can take
mm.
different perspective. Say, do you want it to taste salty? Do you want it to be sweet? Do you want it to? And so from that perspective, is something missing? Okay, what can we increase? And
Uh,
sometimes it's counterintuitive. Sometimes because something is problematic, you're not necessarily going to uh, target that. You're going to do something else that's going to change that.
like
Like,
it's I'm starting to connect it with the counseling room or therapy room.
yeah,
It's like you're not going to take out the depression or the
no,
anxiety. It's impossible. It's like the
no.
soup, but
Yes,
you
exactly. It's
can.
part of the client's experience. It's their lives. And
Yes.
when we try to do that,
Yes.
they do what I was saying earlier with mechanism. With it's that they revolt, or they comply for a while, but they will revolt at some point. Just like a society will be like, no, we don't want to do that because you're missing something.
Is that
You
how
know.
people end up coming back to their therapist with a new problem? And is
Yes,
that how it
it
works?
can be. That's a possibility at least. It can be also because you discover, like as you grow,
Uh-huh.
now you have the possibility of interacting with other problems.
Yes.
It's kind of like the pyramid of needs in a way. It's like, okay, now that I'm less depressed and I can start having social interactions,
Uh-huh.
oh, can you help me with my social anxiety? Social
Uh-huh.
anxiety was not even I was not even aware of it because I was not interacting with people, so I was depressed. But I was depressed, and so I didn't even know what it was like to interact with people. Now I have social interaction, so I can explore my social anxiety. And then, oh great, now I'm in a relationship, but what about meaning of life? What about and so that's what I meant. Like, you fix something, but then you create new problems, and it's not bad. In fact,
Uh-huh.
calling it problems is probably already um, an issue, because then everything that is new, different, is like, oh, a problem to fix. You could say, well, you grow, you gain clarity in your life, integrity, and then what's going to happen? You're
Mm.
going to expand, and you're going to contact something that at some point is going to be a problem. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what do we do? And the pandemic is an example again. It's like, well, we're interconnected, we travel, we have internet, we can we can, yeah, we can travel, and then what happens? Oh, well, yeah, because we can do that, we can spread also a virus. And now we confine, no, we don't interact with anybody. Okay, but that's also a phase of a process. It's like, okay, we've learned something here,
Uh-huh.
and then probably what's going to happen is that we already see it. People, well, therapy, for example, a lot of therapists have started to do therapy over the internet because they could not see their clients in person.
Mm.
I don't know if that's something that you did too, but it
Yeah.
was in a lot of countries like that. And at first, it's like, oh, we cannot do it that way. It's not the same. And now, very quickly, people say, actually, it's really helpful. There's lots of things that I can do this way that didn't work before, and I probably continue to work that way, or at least part of it. So it's like the soup is too salty. I'm going to add something. Oh wow, I've created a new recipe that we started
Uh,
with an accident, and now I'm
uh,
like, you know what? It actually tastes good. Contextualism has more of that acceptance that
uh-huh.
things are not controllable, fixed, and that is still going to be a lot of surprises. So, it's like improvisation. It's like, well,
Mhm.
you can engage in a process. You cannot know what's going to happen next because that defeats the purpose. But you can respond to what happens in a way that keeps creating connection. And like I said, that's how I approach my studies in psychology. I told you that would that would link it back to it, and that all my answers would be in a way the same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
it's I you know in a way I was contextualist without knowing it, I suppose, but perhaps we all are, because
Uh-huh.
I think it's an expression of wanting to be alive, of
Uh,
wanting to connect and to explore, and at the same time to be to belong. Uh, so
yeah.
yeah, obviously we could keep going on the philosophy, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I probably had 15 questions for you, and we just had about less than 10.
Maybe invite me again
It's like,
after you invited other people, and we can do a second part one day if you want. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
it's been wonderful. By the way, Matthew, before you go, uh, you know, um, I listen to Kevin Polk sometimes, and he said, "You
Uh-huh.
want to go on with your shameless plug?"
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
he's funny when I listen to him.
Yes, 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 yes.
Anyway, I want you to share. I don't know if I am from the Philippines. I saw you because you worked with Stephen Hayes, and I saw your name in the books, and
Mhm.
that's how I got to know you. And uh, with internet, with the ebooks, anyone can attend your workshops or
Yep,
uh, read your work. So
yep.
anything new, anything you want to tell the people about
I
what you're doing now?
No, I don't have anything new coming out. I've been working
Mm-hmm.
on things for a couple of years, but I'm still not completely sure exactly what form it will take. Something that as it's a continuation of what I've been doing, but in terms of training, yeah, it's you can go check out the website, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's lots of resources. In general, you
Is
can look
that
at
language
RFT,
as
CBS,
language as
language as
intervention
intervention. Yeah,
dot com?
and you can,
Mm-hmm.
yep, and you can check also the work of other people in RFT, Niklas Tornicki, even Barnes Holmes, Carmen Luciano. There are different people in the world who do things like that, and it's different perspectives. But yeah, I hope that people get interested in the Philippines and in this approach. Also, because I think each culture that gets interested in this approach end up adding something to a different perspective. That's what I did as a French, I think, and the more the different cultures get interested in this approach, the more we benefit from it in the end. So it's not just the Americans are spreading the knowledge to the world. We need to think of it also as okay, what are the Americans missing that the rest of the world can also help with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for the privilege. Two
Thank you,
hours.
thank you.
Wow. I was
Yeah, it went
expecting,
fast.
yeah. So I'm so honored and privileged to have you as a guest, and you're my very first guest, and it's memorable. I learned so much. You know,
I wish you the best
it
for
even
the series of podcasts that you will record after.
yeah, and it busted the myth of the stages of Maslow's.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I hope I'm not
yeah.
gonna be proved wrong, but after all, that's okay. We'll have at least sparked an interesting exploration.
I
If you
patterned
if
my
you find
life.
out that I was wrong, you can tell me. What I can say is that if I was wrong about what he said, at least I can say that I disagree with him. But I think I don't even disagree with him, because I think it's a misunderstanding or a transformation of what he did.
Yes.
But you can check. Yeah.
All right.
I often
Thank
surprise
you.
people, by the way, when I say that. They often say, "Oh, really? I never heard of that." Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And more power to you and Bastyr University.
Thank you.
And stay safe out there.
All right.
We're hopefully at the end of the pandemic. So,
Yeah, hopefully, yes. Yes, I hope.
okay, you take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Thank you.